Our body's endocrine system uses hormones to determine how we act and who we are. In this animation, we experience our hormone-producing organs in a breathtaking way. If the body is to function as a single unit, our cells must be able to communicate with one another. The nervous system is one possible communication pathway, which works with the help of nerve fibers and electrical signals. The endocrine system, on the other hand, generally uses the bloodstream to transport signaling substances called hormones from one place to another. The cells belonging to the endocrine system are located in or near the brain, for example. But there are also cells in other areas of the body that release hormones into the blood and thus communicate with other cells. Depending on how you count them, the human endocrine system includes 8 to 10 endocrine glands. In addition, hormone-producing cells exist in the liver, heart, and many other organs. Let's take a look at these organs, cells, and hormones. The pituitary gland, also known as hypophysis, is considered the most compact endocrine organ. The anterior lobe secretes 6, the posterior lobe 2 hormones. A widely known hormone of the pituitary gland is HGH, also known as human growth hormone or somatotropin, which is produced by the somatotropic cells in the anterior lobe. Somatotropic cells belong to the acidophilic cells because they turn red when exposed to an acidic dye. HGH, like many other hormones in the body, can easily enter the bloodstream because the capillaries near hormone-producing cells have small holes. These thin blood vessels are called fenestrated capillaries. In the bloodstream, HGH can circulate freely in the blood, but it is also bound to a protein called GHBP. When HGH is bound to GHBP, it is unavailable to other cells. But later, it is released when HGH levels in the blood decrease. Both free and bound growth hormones then begin their journey through the body's bloodstream, reaching every cell in the body. Our muscle cells also need this growth hormone. Free HGH circulating in the blood can dock onto 2 somatotropin receptors in a muscle cell, connecting the 2 receptors. This process, known as dimerization, causes numerous reactions within the cell. In muscle cells, for example, the reactions lead to protein synthesis and thus to thickening of the muscle cell. Time and amount of HGH production is controlled in particular by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is located below the thalamus and above the pituitary gland. Its exact location can be seen in the animation of the brain. Special nerve cells called neurosecretory neurons are located there. These produce hormones such as GHRH, which they transfer to fine blood vessels via their axons. The hormones are transported to the anterior pituitary via portal veins, stimulating the somatotropic cells to produce the growth hormone, HGH. From here, it is distributed throughout the body. The pituitary gland's posterior lobe, on the other hand, is a direct neural connection from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. The hormones are transported directly to the pituitary gland, stored near the blood capillaries, and released into the bloodstream as needed. The processes in the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland can be summarized as follows. Releasing hormones are produced in the hypothalamus and transported to the anterior pituitary gland. Here, they stimulate the formation of hormones, which then trigger reactions in other cells, such as the production of further hormones in the thyroid gland. These hormones then control other cells in our body, but also hormone production in the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. This is known as negative feedback. This process can be explained very simply with the help of the growth hormone, HGH, which we are already familiar with. As we have already seen, the releasing hormone GHRH leads to the release of HGH in the pituitary gland. HGH then reaches all the cells in our body and triggers reactions in those cells that have the necessary receptors. As soon as it encounters the cells of the liver cells begin to produce large amounts of a hormone known as IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor. IGF-1 has many functions in our body. It is very important for growth in puberty. As with the thyroid gland, negative feedback also occurs here. This means that the growth factor IGF-1 directly influences the amount of HGH produced. When IGF-1 levels in the blood are high, the amount of HGH produced decreases because the hypothalamus now produces fewer releasing hormones and more inhibiting hormones. Releasing hormones cause the anterior lobe to release HGH. In contrast, inhibiting hormones of the hypothalamus cause the release of HGH to be reduced or stopped. All other hormones in our body work in a similar way. The target cell has receptors to which only very specific hormones can bind. Hormones for which no receptors exist cannot dock to the cell and trigger any processes in the cell. Which processes are triggered in the cell depends on the hormone and the cell. Hormones can stimulate a cell to grow faster. However, hormones can also initiate apoptosis, that is, cell death. Hormones can also control cell division and the shape of cells. We have already seen that the receptor for a specific hormone is found on the cell surface. However, there are also hormones that must first penetrate the cell because the receptors are located inside. There are intracellular receptors located in the cytoplasm of the cell and those located in the cell nucleus. Type 1 receptors only migrate to the cell nucleus once the hormone is bound to them. Numerous processes then take place here, which we will look at in more detail shortly. The process and effect of nuclear receptors and membrane receptors are different. Membrane receptors usually trigger signaling cascades. In this process, a single hormone causes a series of further actions. Existing substances, such as proteins and enzymes, are switched on or off. At the end of the cascade, we then refer to the cellular response, which can be the activation of enzymes, for example. The process from the initial stimulus by the hormone through the signaling cascade to the cellular response is called signal transduction. In the case of nuclear receptors, other processes usually take place. When the hormone binds to its receptor, the target is often our DNA in the cell nucleus, where the blueprint and functioning of our body are stored. This DNA consists of sections that we call genes. These genes store information such as our eye color, but also how our cells work. All genes in this DNA consist of a code composed of 4 bases: adenine and thymine, as well as guanine and cytosine. The reading and copying of this code can be initiated by the hormone receptor complex that has been formed. To do this, the hormone and receptor bind to a specific part of the DNA, thereby leading to inhibition, or, as shown here, triggering the start of what is known as transcription. The polymerase then runs along the gene and copies the code. This copy is called mRNA. This mRNA leaves the cell nucleus and is converted into a protein within the cell with the help of ribosomes. If the ribosomes are part of the endoplasmic reticulum, we refer to them as membrane-bound ribosomes. However, ribosomes can also be found unbound within the cell. When the mRNA docks onto the ribosome, protein biosynthesis occurs. Scientists refer to this process as translation. These proteins can then trigger various reactions within the cell, but can also leave the cell and travel to other cells if they were produced in ribosomes of the endoplasmic reticulum. Gene expression, in which proteins are produced from mRNA, and signal transduction, shown earlier, in which a hormone binds to the outside of the cell triggering a signal cascade, are the most common mechanisms of hormone action. This is how the endocrine glands in our body are able to do their work. Let's take a look at all the hormone-producing glands and their functions within our organism. Our skull houses not only the pituitary gland, which is also known as the master gland. Another endocrine gland is the pineal gland. The pineal gland is located in the center of the brain and controls, among other things, the sleep-wake cycle. It is connected to the retinas of our eyes. When no light hits the retina of the eye, that is, in darkness, the pineal gland produces larger amounts of the hormone melatonin. When light hits the retina, the electrical signals produced by the retina reach the pineal gland, which then reduces melatonin production accordingly. In summary, we can say that the hormone melatonin is produced in darkness and acts on the cells in our body, making our eyes heavy and causing us to fall asleep. We already know that the pituitary gland is called the master gland because it controls the entire hormone balance of the body. It secretes the growth hormone, HGH, but also many other hormones, such as prolactin and oxytocin. In women, prolactin causes the mammary glands to produce milk for the baby. Oxytocin then triggers the milk ejection reflex by causing the muscle cells in the mammary glands to contract, allowing the milk to flow to the baby. The release of prolactin and oxytocin is also controlled by the infant. Receptors on the breast transmit electrical signals triggered by suckling to the brain, causing the release of the two hormones. In this way, the child not only produces milk, but also transports it from the breast to the mouth through the milk ejection reflex. Another gland that produces hormones is the thyroid gland. In humans, it resembles a butterfly and produces, for example, a hormone that consists of either 3 or 4 iodine atoms. We call the hormone with 3 iodine atoms T3, and the one with 4 iodine atoms T4. Thyroid hormones cause an increased metabolism in almost all cells of the human body, meaning that the cells produce more energy and become warmer. This happens, among other things, because the hormones enter the cells, dock onto receptors there, and trigger the gene expression described earlier, which increases the number and activity of the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cells. The correct amount of thyroid hormones in our body is therefore very important. When thyroid hormone production is elevated, the affected person experiences hot flashes and weight loss. When production is low, the body gains weight and feels cold. Let us now turn to another endocrine organ, the adrenal gland. Humans have two adrenal glands, located directly above the kidneys. The adrenal gland basically consists of two different organs. One is the adrenal cortex, which produces steroid hormones and is involved in water, mineral, and sugar metabolism. And the other is the medulla, which produces the stress hormones adrenaline and noradrenaline. Since our body needs to be able to perform quickly in dangerous situations, adrenaline and noradrenaline are already present in the adrenal medulla and are released by the hypothalamus when needed. This happens via nerve pathways that lead from the hypothalamus to the adrenal medulla via the brainstem and spinal cord. Within seconds, the released hormones lead to a higher heart rate and dilation of the blood vessels, for example, so that the muscles are better supplied with blood. By contrast, the adrenal cortex is responsible for enhancing the effects of adrenaline and noradrenaline, as well as for mediating long-term stress. The hypothalamus uses the releasing hormone, CRH, to trigger the release of a hormone in the pituitary gland, which ultimately triggers the production of cortisol in the adrenal cortex. This regulatory circuit is known as the HPA axis, which, in the event of injury, causes cortisol to provide more energy to our cells, prevent excessive inflammation, and help the body cope better with stress and blood loss. Our pancreas is another endocrine but also exocrine organ located near the stomach and the duodenum. It is exocrine because the pancreas releases digestive enzymes into the duodenum, and it is endocrine because it produces hormones and releases them into the bloodstream. The pancreas produces various hormones, such as insulin and glucagon. Both are hormones that cannot penetrate the cell and therefore dock onto membrane receptors. When insulin binds to the corresponding hormone receptor on the surface of a muscle cell, transport proteins on the cell surface allow sugar to pass into the cell. The muscle cell stores this sugar as glycogen for later muscle work. Insulin is produced in greater quantities after eating if the food consumed contains sugars and carbohydrates, which then lead to higher blood sugar levels. The liver absorbs some of the sugars even without insulin, but muscle and fat cells require sufficient amounts of insulin. When blood sugar levels are high, the pancreas releases higher amounts of insulin. When blood sugar levels then drop, it releases more glucagon, causing the liver to produce and release glucose, that is, simple sugar. In this way, the pancreas maintains an optimal blood sugar level in the blood. If the pancreas does not produce enough insulin, this is usually referred to as type 1 diabetes mellitus. In type 2 diabetes mellitus, on the other hand, sufficient insulin is produced, but the cells hardly absorb any sugar, as we can see here in the animation on the right. The ovaries in women and the testicles in men are also both exocrine and endocrine glands. They are exocrine because the ovaries release the egg cell into the fallopian tubes, and the testes produce sperm cells and release them into the vas deferens. However, the testes and ovaries also produce sex hormones such as testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen, which they release into the blood vessels. Progesterone and estrogens are produced in greater quantities in women, while testosterone is produced in higher quantities in men. It is therefore not surprising that women and men develop different physical characteristics, especially during the growth phase. Among other things, the high testosterone levels in men result in more muscle mass, a deeper voice, and strong hair and beard growth. Since women have higher estrogen levels, the typical female breast shape develops. Progesterone is particularly important during pregnancy to prevent the baby from being rejected by the mother's body. Sex hormones have a strong influence on another endocrine gland called thymus. The thymus produces various hormones such as thymosin, thymopoietin, and thymulin. These hormones are released both endocrinally, that is, into the bloodstream, and pericrinally, that is, to cells in the thymus. The pericrine secretion of hormones causes the T cells, which are an important part of our immune system, to mature. More information on this can be found in the animation on the immune system. Since the adaptive immune system develops particularly before puberty, the thymus is relatively large at this stage. Mainly due to the release of sex hormones during puberty, the thymus shrinks progressively and is replaced by fatty and connective tissue.